Alrighty, shall we get going?
Sure.
All on board? Okay. Hello, everybody. Great to see everyone signed in today. So we are really excited to have this WebOps discussion. We've been talking about a little before as you guys all enter, so hopefully it gives you a little teaser. So yeah, we're super stoked to have this discussion and demystify the topic a bit for you. Apologies to anyone who is excited to see Dennis here today. my name is Natalie Chu, and I've commandeered the hosting duties for this webinar. I joined Cheeky Monkey 2 weeks ago as their marketing strategist, and I have to admit, selfishly, I wish this WebOps methodology was around earlier. I'm new to the monkeys and still a bit unbiased, but as a marketer and web lead in all of my previous roles, WebOps makes so much sense strategically and budget-wise. So better now than never. So I'm excited to get started. I'd like to introduce our two panelists. Oh, sorry. I'm going to try and make the poll work. Maybe I won't. I don't know. I was going to do a poll about who's heard of WebOps before and who hasn't in this, but it's kind of being freaky, so I'm not going to do that currently. I might put it up later.
That's okay, Natalie, because if it was Dennis running, I'm still not sure if the Zoom would be up. So.
Okay. So kick the poll to the back for now. Anyways, hopefully some of you have heard of WebOps before, and so we can just educate you further on it. So excited to get started. So introducing our two panelists. First, our very special guest panelist is Sarah Fruey, Director of Brand and Digital Experience with Pantheon. Sarah leads the strategy, goals, and roadmap for Pantheon's public-facing website and branded assets. And she has literally written a book on WebOps. Well, books, plural. And she's put a lot of thought into what WebOps is and how it works, to say the least. And I'm no Oprah, but you'll all get a copy of these books emailed to you after the webinar, along with today's recording, link probably the following day, and a real short survey to fill out that gives you $500 towards your next WebOps project with us. Just project in general, not necessarily WebOps. It's up to you where you're comfortable with it. We're not pushing this hard. We're just informing. So our other guest panelist is Cheeky Monkey's VP of Sales and Marketing, the extra cheeky Patty Beckerton. For almost 15 years, Patty's been doing the digital marketing thing, working with clients and organizations that span the spectrum, from small community organizations to managing fan engagement strategies for NHL and NBA teams. Patty gets around. Those are your words, Patty.
Yeah, I know.
He's now returned to Cheeky Monkey after a 4-year odyssey. He claims he was going out for milk. Again, Patty. And he brings his expertise and personality back to the office to direct, develop, execute marketing strategy for the monkeys and our clients. So for this webinar, because Sarah is kindly joining us, we can really take off with a general kind of Q&A fireside chat style format, which is fun. So between Sarah and Patty, we'll explain how WebOps delivers on killing a relaunch, progressing from the general explanation to how the process works to how it fulfills its promise. So feel free to throw a question into the bottom of your screen and we'll address it as we can and as time permits. And we'll also reserve 15 minutes at the end to answer any questions. So let's go. Welcome, Sarah. So you got to tell us, what is that WebOps? And please explain it in detail.
Sure. So WebOps is a set of practices that brings together developers, designers, content editors, and more. With WebOps culture, everyone whose job it is to update the website in significant ways, be it through code, visuals, content, they think of themselves as one cross-functional team iterating towards the same goals. And one of the ways I like to kind of frame it up is I think of it as the people, the tools, and the process that you use to manage your website. And the process that we recommend here is agile over waterfall, so an iterative approach to web development. The tools you can think of, using a WebOps platform that enables automation, that empowers content editors to take ownership of their digital experience. And then when I think about people, I think about, creating a cross-functional team. So, I mentioned a number of types of roles of designers, developers, content creators. You want to have people that come from diverse backgrounds that are going to bring unique perspectives, and that cross-functional collaboration is really going to create the magic that will help you solve the unique problems for your company.
Patty.
Yes.
What do you, let's hear your perspective.
Well, and I think for us coming from the web side, WebOps is really a fundamental change to the traditional dev process. And I think when you look at how it's been done before, you know, you have a site that goes 4 or 5 years, you let the issues pile up, and then you try to tackle them all at once. It's very stressful, it's very expensive, it's very resource intensive. Whereas WebOps is saying, you know, with a little more regular attention, you're able to methodically tackle smaller issues in order to see bigger progress, right? Rather than letting these small issues pile up until you have no other choice, but to do a full rebuild, you can iterate. Each iteration, right? You're seeing these small issues, you're coming up with a small solution, you're going through, you're measuring, you're testing, and you're analyzing for progress. And then you get to make the decision. Once you've come to the end of these small iterations, you get to make a fun decision for marketers that I think we haven't been able to do for a while, right? Do we move on to the next small issue and have some fun with it, or do we optimize and optimize and optimize on the solution we just came up with, or do we get to do both? And I think over time, what you see with WebOps, as opposed to that, you know, 3 to 4 or 5 year big solution, you get to see this ongoing solution that creates evolution over time. Your site evolves into something better, more effective, and more useful for your audience. And that's, from our perspective on the website, that's what WebOps brings to the table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can really.
Is that a hit or a miss?
I would say that's a hit. I think that one of the benefits of practicing WebOps is that you can respond to customer needs in real time. So one of the problems with taking a waterfall approach to web development is that your marketing plan can become obsolete within a matter of weeks, if not days, depending on the news cycle. And if you aren't taking an iterative approach to how you manage your website, you're going to really hold your team back in a lot of ways. And so, you know, like Patty said, it's really like taking a look at how you make improvements on your site and moving away from a bunch of big releases where you're throwing a bunch of change that's very risky at your audience at one time, to taking in and being really specific about what you're changing and when, and validating that direction ahead of time through these like small experiments to make sure that you're heading in the right direction, versus like, hey, let's relaunch, let's do this whole big thing, and then, hey, I think it's working, maybe it's not, what's working, we're not really sure. And it's really hard to go back to your team and say, when we made all of these changes, this is the stuff that worked. Which is WebOps, you're like, I changed the homepage hero, we added a button here, we changed the color, we looked at the copy. What is that like one thing that you're changing each time, so you can say this worked or it didn't work, but we still feel like this user experience is failing us. How do we pivot? How do we iterate on that to make it better? Or, hey, we got a win. You know, we tried this new tab-based tiling system. We saw great success there. Is there a way, can we improve the language? Can we improve how the buttons are functioning? Or do we want to look at like the next click? Okay, we solved this problem here. What happens when they click that button? And keep trying to, you know, again, optimize on those little wins to drive more impact for your business.
Awesome. I have a really great question coming from the Q&A that I would love. It's perfect timing. So the question is, if my business is in the middle of a website relaunch, deadline for which has been extended multiple times, Roger, how can we work towards a WebOps process to sustain the site once it's launched? And then a follow-up, I'm the lone dev working on this web relaunch. What's the best way to convince my manager to invest more in building a long-term WebOps team? Such a great question.
Oh man, those are some great questions. So the first question, you're in the middle of a relaunch already, and you'd like to sort of pivot to WebOps in the future. And I think really at this point, if you're already in the middle of the project, and having been in a situation where you've gone through that whole process to get there, it's very tough to put the brakes on now and say we're going to pivot and do WebOps. But I think by the same token, you're at a position right now, whereas you're in the process, you're building it. I think if you've got your head up to the fact that WebOps exists, I mean, once if you're taking that agile approach right now, you're going towards your MVP project as opposed to maybe trying to finish all of the huge solutions at once. I think if you look at your MVP and then start planning methodically for, you know, what are those pieces and functions that we want to add, test, and progress forward, you're actually in a pretty good position to get started on WebOps. I think if you're there. From a dev perspective, Sarah, I'm not sure. I mean, dev perspective in terms of convincing your boss that WebOps is the way to go. I mean, we will certainly touch on, I think, a few things that make sense to us, certainly from a marketing perspective, but I think really WebOps shows its benefit not only in the breadth of solutions that you're able to come up with. I think it's far more cost effective, and certainly as the lone dev, which I'm assuming is very much like being the lone marketer on a web team, you're probably under constant pressure to show progress all the time. And so what you're probably used to is people coming into your office asking you how things are going on the website, and you're like, oh, I'm still working on this big stuff, versus WebOps where you're able to say, hey, we just did a fix. Here's the data to show it worked. Here's the data, you know, here's what we're doing next. Here's our methodical plan. So I think there's just a lot of opportunity for better use of funds, resources, and time. And there's also more opportunity to show your bosses that there's, you know, you're taking a successful run at the issues that you're facing.
Yeah, I would say definitely focus on what's your MVP. Like, what is your minimum viable product that you can launch with? Like, does it have to have all of these requirements that maybe you set out with from the beginning? Can you streamline it to a few things and like get that buy-in from like senior leadership of like, we wanted to go live with this. Are you comfortable with me doing these changes? Like maybe you're changing the header and the footer and like your typography on the site. That can have like a major transformation to your digital experience, but still, you know, sort of time box what you want to accomplish within like a sprint or whatever timeline you guys are working with that's shorter period, and then say this release for this new functionality will come in the next iteration, and then that will come in the next iteration. And so you start to space out rather than trying to do all this stuff at once. What can you nail and get out there out the door to make sure that your audience is responding well? I would really try and focus on that, of paring down your ambitions for the relaunch. And then how as a dev can you enable WebOps culture more? One of the things you could try now is as a dev, you need like QA some of the stuff that you're building, right? You could pull in different people from around your company to help you QA, from like sales or marketing or HR or whatever. I mean, those people that aren't maybe your customers are going to give you some perspective on the usability of what you're building that could be really helpful to you in your process. And I think as a developer, that's a great way where you can sort of bring that value, that collaborative, you know, interdepartmental perspective to improve your project from the where you sit.
I think that's one of the best parts of WebOps, Sarah, that really appeals to me. And I know we were talking about it briefly before we even started, was really that cross collaboration and getting the entire team together. And that's a really huge part of this. And I think, you know, WebOps for successful WebOps approach, you really want to eliminate those silos and barriers between departments, right? You want the entire team focused together on those bigger picture goals, so they're able to collaborate. And I think, you know, once you're able to get the entire team focused and empowered to make those changes, it really provides opportunity for just greater solutions that you can then go and test and watch for progress. I think there's not enough that can be said about having the entire group around the table, I think.
Absolutely.
I think I think it's written. You wrote it in one of the. Sorry, it is fan worship, so I'm gonna say it. It's really in one of in the latest ebook. I think you wrote, like, if you have an us versus them mentality among your crew, get rid of it. And that really is how you have to do it, because when you get the entire team together, ideas just pop. And it reminds me, as especially as marketers, and the three of us, I think, you're, you know, all marketers. How many times have you sat around that boardroom table? There's a bunch of marketers all sitting together and saying, okay, here's this issue we have to solve. What's everybody's ideas? And you go around and around and you're getting the same stuff from a bunch of marketers, because marketers all have generally, a similar perspective. We might have different job experience, but we're all coming at the issue from the same angle. And now you're relying on some marketer at the table to suddenly think outside the box, think in the way they've never thought before. And that's hard. Hey, changing your entire lifestyle of thinking, very difficult. But what happens when you take that same boardroom and you put a developer in the mix? Now a developer comes and sits there and says, hey, have you thought about this solution? And it's probably completely foreign to marketers because we wouldn't think that way. But now instead of relying on marketers to think outside the box, we've just created I guess a bigger box with more perspectives, with more experience, and we're coming up with better solutions. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I was talking to Patty a little bit before this call when we were prepping for the chat, and I was telling him a story about an experiment that we're currently running on Pantheon's website, where we have chatbots in our intercom that pops up and says like, hi, can I help you with something? And there's a sequence of questions. And ultimately the goal for these bots is to book meetings on behalf of our sales team. And I got feedback recently from one of our BDRs that they were having a low attendance rate on these bot booked meetings. And so that's not something that like I can pull a report to like find out in Salesforce. I needed that anecdotal bit of information from him. And so he suggested, can we change the dialogue from the bot so that they put in an agenda before booking the meeting with me? And so we're testing that out. But like, that's where like having these relationships with people across the board, bringing these ideas, that's going to improve our customer experience. It's going to save time on the BDRs. It's going to save my company money because we're not sitting there for 15 minutes waiting for somebody to show up for a Zoom call that has no intention of being there. And so, as developers on this call, as marketers, like reach over the aisle, like make friends with people that you don't normally talk to, especially like in this digital world, right? Like we're all sitting here right now, we're working from home. It's really hard to collaborate cross-functionally for some people, depending on how their businesses are set up. And if you're in charge of the website, just like, hey, do you want to grab coffee with me for 15 minutes? I'd love to hear what you think about this new landing page that I'm working on. And it doesn't have to be super formal, or, maybe a little sketch of something that you're thinking about. Does this resonate with you? Does this flow make sense to you? And start to get those other perspectives so that, you're adding more value to the project and not just working in the silo of like, hey, this worked for me in the past, I'm going to rinse and repeat and do these playbooks. But how can we make this better by pulling in other people's points of view?
And I think the fundamental part, these small iterative changes, also takes a lot of the risk away from the individuals as you're in those brainstorms, right? Like when you're sitting there trying to come up with a solution that's going to be tens of thousands of dollars and require months and months of man time, there's a pressure that comes with that. But when you're talking about smaller iterations, any idea is on the table, right? If it is going towards your big picture goal, it's a lot easier to go out and do a 2-week iteration and change and see where it goes. And that leads into the measuring and testing, right? Every small change, every small idea is valid if you can put it to some sort of measuring stick, test it and optimize. I think the other thing that we speak about when we're looking at WebOps isn't just sort of you make one change, you measure, test, and just okay, that's great, and we'll see you in another few months. I think if you continue this consistent attention on those small details, those small issues, you're creating that evolution. And that's where from our experience as a web developer, that's where working with Pantheon becomes really, really helpful, just because of the tech stack and the way you guys set everything up. It makes it very easy to move from one iteration to the next, right? We're not having to stop the bus and then reset and go. The tech stack that you guys have provided and how you've set things up just make it so much easier for companies nowadays, I think, to continue that progress.
Yeah, one of my favorite features, not to get like too salesy about it, but is our multi-dev environments. It's one of the reasons I actually joined Pantheon to lead their dev team when I started to learn about it. But we call it multi-dev environments, and essentially it's the ability for our developers to work in separate development environments so we can de-risk our experiments. We can bang around in there and try a lot of risky things, and it won't take down the rest of the website. For me as a team leader, I can test these experiences out before they go live on my site to make sure that things aren't broken. We had a big release once, and all of a sudden right before we were about to push live, we realized that the Marketo form wasn't loading properly. And because of this test environment, I was able to pause. we created like a quick form really fast to resolve the issue, and then went back to solve the Marketo problem later on. But if I didn't have that complete mirror of my website in our test environment, we have a dev test live at Pantheon, I would have gone live and I could have lost leads on this new campaign that we were releasing. And so there's a lot of like fail safes there that just give me a lot of confidence that I'm going to market with the best product possible. I can give my team the space to create and innovate. And then also when I want to ramp an agency like Cheeky Monkey onto a project, I can create multi-devs for them. Again, they're not disrupting my main workflow for my team. It's really easy for them to merge with our code and not have any conflicts and things like that. And so as your projects are starting to, you know, spiral off into these iterations, you can turn down that multi-dev if all of a sudden what you're working on is no longer relevant to the future experiments, or if we want to merge them together, it's really easy to do that. And so I think at the core of any good WebOps program or experimentation program is that you need a solid foundation of technology. And so one of the things that I advise people as you're adopting WebOps culture, if you don't have a good foundation from a technology standpoint, and it's really hard for you to make changes to your website, fix that first. Make sure that your website is working before you try and get into this really robust method of, you know, ideation and iteration on your site, because that's just going to cause a lot of headache. So make sure that the tech stuff is working first.
I think
Start with the basics, right?
Absolutely. That kind of goes back to the question we had there at the beginning, where he's, you know, in the middle of a redesign and already, right? Make sure that tech and that MVP is solid, and then you're in a better position. I would say it's probably really tough to implement a WebOps program on a website that is, you know, it's hard-coded HTML and hasn't been updated since 2007. Probably really tough to implement a WebOps program on that.
Yeah.
But I love, okay, so I love how you termed it WebOps culture. I think that's a great, I'm going to steal that, by the way.
Yeah.
So are we going to talk about like more in depth about that team collab and focus kind of what we should be looking to with the WebOps, Patty?
I think, yeah. So, and I'm going to put this up here because I love this. This is really when you talk about that team, right? You want to get a team together that has a multitude of experience, but they're all, I think the key here is they're empowered to make those changes on the website. And I think if the team is together, if you've got a clear vision and goals for what you're trying to do, if everyone's aligned that way, it does make it far easier. I think, Sarah, you'd mentioned, you know, the ability of, you know, whether it's you, or if it's a developer, or if it's, you know, somebody from your BDR team is empowered to go through and make those changes on the site, because the team is aligned and together. And I think it's really tough. This is where WebOps can be challenging for a lot of companies, is really trying to break down those silos and those barriers. We're so used to working, you know, marketing works with marketing, sales works with sales, design works with design, development works with development. And it's a bit of a mind switch to say now, instead of being, you know, in our little groups, now we have to make one big family. And that can be scary for some people, I think. But I think once you've got that, you know, when you put in creativity next to technological mastery, which is really, I mean, marketers and developers sitting together coming up with ideas, I think you're gonna generate better ideas. You're gonna create more holistic solutions to your issues, and I think over time you basically get a more well-rounded website, and you're eliminating a lot of the potential pain points. When, say, a marketer comes up with a great idea and goes to a developer, and a developer says, sounds good, that's going to take 1.5 years to build, and, you know, 1,000 man hours, right? I think if the whole team's collaborating together, you're able to come up with ideas that are a lot smarter as well.
Yeah, and I think,
oh, sorry, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say, I think you know, I'm sitting from a position where I'm hiring this team and I'm managing them, and so as a team lead, one of the things that I could say is it's really important to be sensitive to the different voices in the room, right? Like, we can sit here and say, like, bring a cross-functional group of people in the room, and then the same two people just lead every single meeting every single week and they're full of ideas and they sort of like box out everyone else in the conversation. And so again, when you're thinking of encouraging and developing a WebOps culture, if there's people that are really quiet, like call on them. Hey, was there anything that you wanted to add to this? Like knowing that they may be quiet, or like follow up after an email. Like if anybody has more ideas, like let's start a thread here over on Slack and keep the conversation going. But make sure that people's voices are being heard, because that's where these great ideas are going to come from. It's not going to come from the same person every week saying like, let's do this, let's do that. Like you want to get those voices heard. And the other thing that I like to do is I like to mix it up. So I'll sometimes bring in someone from product one week to our experimentation calls where we're coming up with new ideas for the website, and say like, hey, I know that you have nothing to do with the marketing site. You're totally focused on product, but is there something that you think that we could be doing better here? And just kind of shake it up a little bit. So don't get into a rut of like only working with the same people. Like, yes, get that cross-functional team together, but pull in different perspectives, bring in different types of people, and don't forget to talk to your customers, right? Like we're doing this for them. Don't keep it all in-house. Like send out surveys, do user interviews, but stay focused on the end goal, which is to improve your website for your customer, for your user, and talk to them. Like make sure you're hearing from them. You aren't making this website for you, you're making it for them. So always go back to your customer. Make sure it's customer-focused conversations for sure.
We have another great question, kind of perfect timing because we're just touching on that WebOps culture. So earlier, Sarah, you mentioned experimentation. What role does experimentation play in WebOps and the WebOps culture? Another great question from the lone dev. Thanks, Daniel.
For me, it's really like at the core of everything that I do. You know, one of the things that I like to say is it's not about winning, it's about getting it right. And so when you're taking these different ideas, sometimes I'll have team members that come up with something and I don't think it's a good idea. I don't agree that this is the right direction for us to take, but I'm like, hey, let's test it. We're going to throw it into our cycle. We'll see if it works and prove me wrong. Like, I love it when my team can say like, hey, Sarah, like this thing worked and you didn't like it. Like, yeah, you know, I don't need to win anymore. I just want to make sure that we're creating the best experience. And the numbers don't lie when you're running it through like a VWO or an Optimizely or whatever tools you are, you know, Google Analytics to measure the impact of these things. So one of the ways that I think of experimentation with WebOps is like we come up with a backlog of ideas, we prioritize that backlog, and then we time box it. And so usually we're trying to get to statistical significance with the experiments that we're running. Sometimes we have to call it and you know, hey, this experiment's been going on for 2 months now. We're not really seeing a lift. We're not seeing a major change in behavior. Is that a win? Can flat be a win of like, it didn't disrupt things, didn't break anything, flat is okay? Or are we trying to cause like a change in a positive behavior or pivot away from something that's causing negative behavior? Sometimes I can call an experiment really quickly of like, whoa, our numbers are tanking quickly. I don't need to reach statistic. I want this off my website now. So it requires a lot of attention and then also the ability to implement those ideas, right? If you have a win, I don't recommend soft coding it through your experimentation tool. You can build up tech debt really quickly and start to get buggy. Work with your dev team to take that experiment, get an MVP up on your website as you're continuing to iterate, so that your customers can benefit from those results and you're not waiting to do another huge release later on. Like, do the experiments, push them live, and keep going and building off of that, because it will get harder and harder if you spiral into this like soft coding cycle, which I know some people try and use their experimentation tools as a CMS. I don't recommend that.
I think just to jump in as well, you know, as far as experimentation and culture, it's interesting. And Natalie, having just come on board with us, I'm sure you remember this question where, you know, the CEO likes one path, the CMO likes another. Which one do you go with? And the correct answer is, well, you test them both and find out which one works. And so when you look at how experimentation does affect that culture, it helps to take egos out of the equation. And you know, Sarah's talking about, you know, listening to your customer. Well, your data is going to give you the voice of the customer very quickly. And so that helps you eliminate a lot of the guesswork. You're able to pay attention to what your customers are saying through how they're reacting. on your website, and it becomes, it really is at the bottom line, it's customer experience. You're experimenting to ensure customer experience.
Yeah. One thing Teddy and I were talking about too is this idea of positive failure, right? Don't be afraid that your test doesn't win. Like that is a way to de-risk your decision. So if I get a failed test, I can tell you in 2 weeks maybe that experiment didn't work versus me spending a quarter of my team's time working towards some big idea that we find out after the fact was not so great of an idea. But maybe that failed test inspires someone else to be like, that didn't work, but what if we try this? And then that second test or that third test, as you all of a sudden get this outlier, right? We talk about like swinging for the rafters. Some of our experiments are going to have like small incremental changes, and some of them have like a big impact on our user behavior. But the idea of like constantly testing, you will result in wins, but you have to be willing to accept the fact that like not all of your ideas are going to win. And then the key thing there that I just want to drive home is learning from it. It's okay to lose as long as you learn from it. If you just like brush those results aside and you aren't trying to take the time to understand why did that experiment fail, you're going to miss an opportunity for your team and for your experience.
Totally.
So I think we've got to the big question, you know, the question of the day. So how does the WebOps process actually kill the relaunch?
I think, you know, to answer that question, you've almost got to go back to why do organizations go through a redesign process in the first place? Like, let's take a look at this. You know, the ones that we hear all the time, right? The graphics are outdated or they're off brand now. The technology has become obsolete and they need to update, you know, or, you know, they've had to pivot with their market and now there's new business needs. I mean, things like that, like, you know, global pandemics really switched the needs of companies. But then you've come to this point where you realize there's been all these issues that have piled up over the last few years, and now you're finally deciding to do something about it. So you're going to go through this really arduous process to create a new site, right? Like somebody has to finally be in enough pain to be motivated to make a change. Then you need to go and get, you know, approval on budget. You need to get buy-in from all the departments. Then you need to go out and get quotes and then go through the procurement process. And then you're negotiating with vendors, you know, and then you're getting started. And by this time you're already 6 months down the path. All those issues that have been piling up are now 6 months older. And you haven't even started it. You're just finally getting to a point where you're going to start with somebody. And now you start in this project. Now you're taking another 4 to 6 months just on a project. You're getting to the end. You're almost a year in. And now marketers are rushing to the analytics to find out, did it make a change? Like, how do I justify this last year of time, effort, money? How do I justify it with all of, you know, what we've just gone through? And you're looking at metrics and you're trying to figure it all out. You know, and sometimes you're going to see positive results, and you know, in this case, sometimes you're going to see those fail points, and after you've spent a year and, you know, tens of thousands of dollars, that whole concept of positive failure is a lot tougher to take, I think. But you look at WebOps. How does WebOps kill this process? Well, you know, these things, your graphics, your technology, these pivots with your market, these things come up. There's signposts, there's smaller issues that you can see, and you're able to, with a focus on your main business goals, notice and recognize them a lot quicker, ideate a solution, and execute it, go through the testing and measurement process and optimize. And now, instead of waiting 3 to 4 years before there's a big issue, you're able to react and pivot far quicker. I mean, the essence of agility, right? You're able to go and jump in and create those fixes, measure and test. And then over time, what you're doing is, you know, as you're fixing one issue and then moving on to the next or optimizing, you're creating this positive progress. You're creating this forward movement over and over again. And I think really what happens is, over time, you know, with this evolution, you've eliminated the need to rebuild, right? You know, you've gone through this, you've changed these iterations together, and even with positive failure, you're still making progress, right? Everything's moving forward and upwards. And I guess really how I see this killing the relaunch is the simple fact that, 4 to 5 years later, when you're sitting there where other marketers are in a position where, the website's falling apart and they have to make a change, going through the WebOps process, you're 4 to 5 years down the road, and you're in the process where you're already iterating to make something better because what you had just launched 2 weeks ago is still in line with your market. It's in line with your customers and your audience. The technology's up to speed, and you're able to progress forward. So I guess that's how a big reason how I see WebOps fixing and alleviating the rebuild and relaunch. It's not so much about killing the relaunch. There's still going to be companies and people out there that really just, they'll want to continue to do things the way they always have and go through this, 3 to 4 year cycle of stress and trouble. And then there's people who are going to say, you know what, this is just way easier and makes more sense. So I don't know if it necessarily will kill the relaunch so much as it'll kill the need for a relaunch.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of use cases where relaunches are still going to happen, right? Like you're going to rebrand your company. You need to relaunch your website when you do that. Like it's like you have to change everything, right? Your color palette's changing, your logos, everything. That's a good use case for relaunching your website. Or, for folks that have been neglecting their website for a really long time, you've outgrown your current tech stack and you need to move to something more sophisticated. There's a lot of companies that have like sprouted up during this time of digital revolution, and that like Wix site that you started on is no longer serving the needs of your company. So you need to move to like Drupal or WordPress or something. And though that replatforming is going to require a relaunch. But I would say, how do we kill the relaunch? It's exactly what Patty's saying. It's like, if you are constantly working on improving your user experience, your website will reflect that. And so there won't be this wake up call in 6 months of everybody like, oh, I hate the website. It doesn't do what I want. It's like, fix those problems, keep finding them, attack them, move on to the next problem, but be constantly working on making it better. And you won't feel this need to overhaul everything because you're finding ways all the time to improve that. And like, you also don't need to think of it as like the entire website, right? Like where I focus my energy are on the main touch points in my customer journey. Like our homepage, we have a demo that I really want to push people to. We have a free trial offer that I want to push people to. Our pricing page is super important to our customers. Like, what parts of your website are driving the most value for your organization, and really spend a lot of your time and energy there, because that's also where you're going to get to stat sig. You're going to be able to make decisions faster. And then I look at things of like, are there swaths of my site that I can look at and bucket together to make a change? Like we do a lot of ebooks at Pantheon. We have a lot of webinars. What is that template? What does that experience look like? Can I make a change there that will impact like 50 landing pages versus like a single landing page? And that's another way to use an incremental approach to actually result in bigger changes to your site. Or like the navigation that can have a huge impact on your customer experience depending on what you want to do there. And another thing with like WebOps culture is this concept of automation. Especially when it comes to like your dev team, is like looking at redundant tasks. Is there something that you are constantly doing like week after week, month after month? Can you write some scripts? Can you use some dev tools to automate those tasks on a platform like ours at Pantheon? And then that frees up your team to do more meaningful work, and you're going to get more impact out of your team for that. And then also like using your dev team to create really usable templates for your content creators so that they feel empowered to make changes. And like, we're not backlogged on requiring a technical expert to always update the website. That's really going to free your team to move faster. Like, I saw this on the news this morning. I want to change something on the homepage, and like the marketing team feels empowered and confident to go on the website and make that change. Like that is, you don't need to relaunch. You could just go in and make those changes, right? And then all of a sudden you have this whole new way of communicating to your customer that drives new results for you all. And then you can measure them. Like, we made that change. We responded to the news cycle. It worked. Yay. It didn't. All right, next time I'll try something different. But we tried it and we learned from it. That's the important thing.
I think the other thing that this process really helps out with, and it's probably scary for some people as we're talking about, say, going through a website project every 3 to 4 years, and there's marketers out there saying like, yeah, well, every 3 to 4 years is when I can afford the time to actually pay attention to the website. And I think that's a situation because you've had to let everything else pile up. We are running, I mean, everybody's bandwidth is so so frayed right now, like nobody has time. But I think with WebOps, we're talking about doing constant and iterative changes, and people are assuming, well, that means like 8 hours a day, 7 days a week for the rest of your life. And it's like, no, it's, really putting in, a regular effort alleviates so much more time and eliminates a lot of those issues down the road that marketers are stuck going, oh, I've got this new problem. Oh, just add it to the list. I mean, I think if you're putting in that regular attention over time, you're eliminating a lot of the stuff down the road. You're freeing up a lot of time and resources. And I think, as Sarah's saying, when everybody on the team is empowered to do the changes, you're not now relying just on your single marketer to be the one doing all of this. And that's another great reason, I think, or how it eliminates that relaunch, is because everybody's working on it, and you're not in a situation where, that marketer who's in charge of the website has to find the time or the opportunity to let every other task go so they can focus on the website, right? You're able to do it certainly a lot more methodically and with far less stress, I feel. I think that's a big key.
Yeah, one of the things I like to say too is like, apply agile to agile, right? If this is something that's new to your organization, what does one test a month look like? And then, okay, we've achieved that goal. That's our first MVP. We got one experiment out this month, boom. Okay, next quarter, can we do 2 experiments a month? Next half of the year, do we want to do 4 experiments a month? I mean, that's one of the ways I've ramped up my team, and I've gotten funding from the executives of like, hey, look at these little experiments I ran. They're working. Can I have more budget? Can I hire more staff? Can I get more internal resources? And use that agile approach to validate your program, and that will show the results. And the other thing that I like to say to people that don't want to invest in their website, I'm like, are you spending money online? Do you have banner ads? Do you have webinars? Do you have email campaigns going out? I can guarantee you most of the calls to action are driving back to your website. So if you aren't investing in experience, you're failing your marketing team and you're failing your customer, because like if everybody's going to your URL should be awesome. Your website should be awesome. So don't let people down that you're going to get more money out of those demand gen dollars if your website can respond and is doing its job. And that needs to be up to date to do that.
Totally. Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Oh, Natalie, you're on mute. I see you talking. That's awesome.
Being respectful there. So I think we've done all we've gone through all the advantages and all that good stuff. And we're pretty much we're 11:47. So I have one more question from the audience. Can you speak to smaller web development organizations that don't have larger teams of people to do all the things you highlight? How can the WebOps be applied to small organizations of 1 to 10 employees? Great question.
I think this is a situation where it's a little self-serving answer from Cheeky Monkey's part, is because this is the exact situation where a company like ours becomes really beneficial for smaller organizations out there, is because when we're coming to work with our clients in a WebOps program, our WebOps team is now coming in and filling in that gap on your marketing team. So I look back to my own experience. I had a department where there was a marketer, there was a social media coordinator, I had a designer, but I didn't have a developer. And in that case, in a situation like that, say a WebOps team from a web agency like Cheeky would come in, and that team now is occupying that hole where your developer would sit. They can come in and fit that way, and now you're still getting the benefits of that WebOps process, that collaboration, that ideation. It's working towards on those developer issues. But that being said, it's an agile team. It's if you're missing 2 people, if you're missing everybody, right? That's where you can plug in a WebOps team from an agency that's going down this road. Those are the services they're offering, and that becomes certainly more beneficial for those smaller organizations. The other side of the coin that I always get hit with is like, well, it's expensive to bring in an agency, and when you think about WebOps and the hours and things that are involved is really not that expensive. It's, hiring a full-time resource in-house, you've got the salaries, which, depending on where you live, could be anywhere from 50,000 to 100 and change, right? You've got, as a small organization, you've got a salary to deal with, you've got holiday pay, you've got sick days, you've got onboarding time, all of that stuff. And when you add all that up, it's really easy to just bring in an outside agency to help you with that. So cost-wise, I think it's fairly similar to bring in an outside WebOps team as it is to bring on a full-time resource. I think that's where the benefits come in.
Yeah, one of the ways that I totally agree with that, and I've hired agencies numerous times to supplement my team. And one of the ways I get budget from folks is, that North Star metric, right? When we talk about WebOps, we're all leaning towards the same goal. What is the goal that you're trying to accomplish for your organization? And can you create a business plan of how hiring an agency will help you achieve that goal faster? Like I could do this with our team, but it's going to take me 6 months because we have all these other projects and priorities or whatever. Or can I hire an agency and I can get it done this quarter? Like, how important is this to you, CEO, CMO, to get done? Because you can expedite the process by hiring an agency and activating them more quickly. And then you can, if you have that North Star that you're aligned on and you're measuring your program, you can prove ROI of like, we spent this much money on the agency, we saw this much impact on our website, that program essentially paid for itself, ideally, if you're doing it right. Or there's a little bit of an opportunity cost there, but like hopefully you're amplifying the results. And then again, you're going to recoup that ROI pretty quickly. And think about really strategic initiatives like, performance audits are really important. Can you hire an agency to do something like that? And then take that backlog and sort of implement some of the ways that you want to improve performance on your site. Accessibility is really important to folks. You want to hire an agency that like specializes in their industries, certain like customer issues. If you're like in e-commerce or something like that, like hiring an agency with expertise is going to provide value in a way that you, like Patty was saying, you can't hire for all of that, right? Like they've worked on like 10 sites like yours versus like your team only works on your site. And that's where, for me, hiring agencies has really like had like an exponential impact on my ability to achieve results, because I'm learning from them and their experience with all their other customers, that they're bringing that value back to me. Like, do I need to like upgrade from like D7 to D9? Like that might be a first time for my team. We've actually done this 4 times and we learned a lot on those 4 other projects that we did, or 10 other projects or whatever. Like my team isn't going to have that. And so that's a way that you can kind of like sell it up the ladder, I think.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I think that goes for like, no matter who you are in the organization, whether you're the one sole dev guy or the one lone marketer, like we're just going to, we want to give you the, arm you with some information so that you can influence, going forward, the decisions that are made, because, otherwise you're just going to get stuck in that same rut.
Totally. Yeah. And whether you're, if you're the lone marketer on the team, or if, if you're the lone developer or the lone designer, I mean, there's, right, the ability of WebOps to come in and complement whatever skills you've already got. I mean, that's just a huge benefit. And
they can teach you about WebOps culture along the way.
We're using that. I love it.
And it's not like that kind of, what's the word? Like, it's not just that trendy, like, culture, it's getting very popular. And it's so much more than that, because it really is. Like, it's like Sarah says, like, it's about having a conversation all the time. And much like the whole approach. So it's just bizarre that it is not more widely used.
I think you're going to see a lot more companies and organizations moving in this direction. If for no other reason, it just makes more sense. Mm-hmm. And we could go into we could stay here for another hour talking about all the different benefits and stuff. I mean, from the marketing side, it obviously makes sense, but really think about the the people cost. Burnt out marketers, designers, developers, right? Leaving in turnover. That becomes an issue when you're going through these rebuilds every 3-4 years. You might have somebody who stays on staff for 3 years. They go through one rebuild and they're like, okay, enough of that. right? Like, stress can, this process eliminates a lot of that as well. And I think, again, it just makes sense from so many different angles.
Absolutely. Like, I find one of the best things for me about working with these cross-functional teams is like when somebody has an idea, we test it out, and it does end up like winning that experiment. They have like a lot of sense of pride because they look at the website and like, I made that change. Like, that was my idea. I contributed to the success. Like, I helped earn my paycheck this month,
Yeah.
like that's really valuable in a time where I think a lot of folks don't feel as valued as they could. You aren't sitting in these meetings. We aren't giving each other like high fives and stuff like that. But to actually like be in a program where you're pushing through these changes, you can see the results, and you're making the impact in a really timely manner. It gives me a lot of pride in the work that I do, and a lot of pride in the people that I work with, that encourages more innovation as you evolve your program.
Totally. Yeah. And I think if we watch any, Tony Robbins professional video or something, they're talking about, valuing your employees, giving people a sense of ownership, and really this WebOps team, this WebOps culture, that's what it's about: empowerment and giving people the opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah, one of the things we talk about at Pantheon a lot is like, when we think of our WebOps platform, we want to be the reason you got a promotion, right? That you like recommended this work, that you have the tools to do it, and you can say like, I did something that moved our company in a positive direction. And I think that WebOps is the way to achieve those kinds of goals.
Totally. Yeah.
We've been good with time, guys. That was awesome. And we have actually answered all of the questions that we were posed. So if anybody has any last minute questions, we'll get those answered. Otherwise, we'll wrap up and let everyone get on with it. Give it just a second here. I think we're probably good. So yeah, just to wrap up, on behalf of our guest panelists and the team at Cheeky Monkey Media, I'd love to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope we succeeded in demystifying WebOps a bit. Watch for a couple of emails from us with the ebooks, the recording link, and a quick 2-minute survey. Yeah, and we hope we've given you some information that you now can go and better influence your next web relaunch, and who knows, potentially use the WebOps approach. And I think that's a wrap. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. And thanks, Sarah, for being on this call with us. I've enjoyed it immensely, trading back and forth with you on this one, for sure.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Sarah.
Okay.